the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week. And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua. And today's question is, what if changing the world doesn't mean loud protests or big speeches, but quiet, thoughtful actions? Well, our guest for today is the perfect guest to answer that question. Dorcas Cheng-Tuzon is an award-winning writer, editor, speaker, communications consultant, and former INC.com Inc. columnist. She is the author of 3 books, the most recent being Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul: How to Change the World in Quiet Ways. Her writing has appeared in dozens of publications in the USA and Asia and Africa. Dorcas has more than 20 years of experience in the nonprofit and social enterprise sectors. She currently serves as a high school instructor of social innovation at Valley Christian Schools. And today she is going to share her insight, her experience, her perspective with us. Dorcas, thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Joshua.
I'm quite excited, of course, Dorcas. You have quite the mission that you're living right now, especially with
Mm.
your latest book titled Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul. Changing the world in quiet ways is quite a concept that, you know, I don't think it's that common. It's something that people probably can't grasp right away. And
hmm
but before we really start getting into that concept, Dorcas, what inspired you to focus on the quieter side of social justice work? But more importantly, what was the story like? As a child, did you always know you were going to get into social justice? And what was the story? What was the origin story of Dorcas?
No, I did not, as a child, have any sense of what I was going to do. The funny thing is, I did at one point think about being a teacher, which I actually am now. Just started
Oh,
teaching
wow.
last year, so I'm still
Mhm.
pretty brand new to that career.
Wow.
But it wasn't until I went to college that
Mhm.
I participated in a program called Alternative Spring Break, which instead of going on vacation for your spring break, you go and do a service learning trip. So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. This is also where I went to school. And so we
Uh-huh.
went into a neighborhood of San Francisco called the Tenderloin, which is
Mhm.
a low income neighborhood, continues to be today. And we were really looking at the issue of housing, homelessness, why people are on the streets, why they
Right.
don't have places to go or to live. And that was incredibly eye-opening for me. I had grown up very sheltered. I have immigrant parents, and so I think they did their best to try to protect me from
Mhm.
a lot of the hard things of life, which I appreciate, but at the same time, it also limited my life experience and my perspective of the
Right.
world.
Of
And
course.
so when I got out there and saw and began to understand that people, remain in poverty not just because of poor choices they've made, which is something that I had been taught, but there's so much inherent to the way our systems work that
Mhm.
make it really hard for people to break that cycle of poverty,
Mhm.
even if they've done everything right, even if they work really hard, they got a good education. It does not mean, it is no guarantee that you're going to have a place to live, that you're going to have a living wage, right? That you're going to be
Mhm.
able to support your family. And that's
Mhm.
when I began to understand, oh, there are things in our society that are unfair, fundamentally unfair, but they
Right.
can be changed. So starting in college and then after I finished school, that became my passion: is how do we make our societies more fair, more
Mhm.
inclusive, give people greater opportunity to
Mhm.
meet their potential and and thrive
That's
in
it.
terms of their physical health, their mental health, their careers, their families, and so that has been something very, very deeply important to me for the last 20 plus years.
Wow.
But
Mm,
segueing to the topic that you're talking about, um, the challenge was, as much as I love the work that I was doing, on the
right.
other hand, I could not find a way to do it that felt sustainable. So I was burning
Oh,
out over and
interesting.
over and over again.
Interesting.
I was pretty much on a cycle of every 2 to 3 years, I would have a burnout, and it would get more severe to the
Mm,
point where there were a couple of times I burned out so badly, I was incredibly depressed,
wow.
incredibly anxious, could not even get out of bed for
Wow.
months at a time.
Wow.
And that's when I began to wonder, what am I doing wrong? I think there's
Mm,
this assumption that if you find your passion in life, which I felt like I had, that then everything's going to sort of fall into place from there. But I was living in this tension of, I have found what feels like my purpose in life, and yet it's also causing me a lot of physical and emotional harm, and there's something in here that's not quite right. There's something I need to figure out. And so that's a question that I've actually been wrestling with for a very long.
wow.
And it wasn't until the opportunity for this book came along. It was the summer of 2020. You probably
Wow.
remember that was a horrible time for pretty much the whole world, right? We had the pandemic.
Hmm.
Here in the US, we had a significant rise in anti Asian hate, prejudice,
Yes. Oh my
violence.
goodness. Oh my goodness.
You had the murder of George Floyd and several
Hmm.
other African Americans, and the Black Lives
Hmm.
Matter movement. And it just felt like the world was on fire.
Yes.
Right? It felt like so much was going wrong. And I wanted so badly to participate in these movements, to have some engagement with these issues that I
Hmm.
cared so deeply about. But I was scared. I was scared I had stepped back a little bit. I had been writing for quite a number of years, which felt like sort of a safer profession. I still
Hmm.
wrote about a lot of social issues, but it was sort of from the safety of my home in front of my computer. And I felt this desire to get back out there and to engage more. And
Hmm.
yet I didn't know how to do it in a way that wouldn't
Wow.
end up with me terribly depressed in bed.
Right.
And so this was the question that I was wrestling with. And what
Right.
this book tries to answer is that there are a lot of us, a significant percentage, it could be, I think, anywhere from 20% or even more,
Wow.
who are highly sensitive souls. And
Hmm.
so we are just wired differently. We're
Yes.
wired as people who are very deep feelers, very deep
Hmm.
thinkers, and the loud, aggressive, confrontational kind of
Hmm.
action, whether it's in social justice, whether it's in the workplace, no matter what you're doing,
Correct.
that's going to take a much bigger toll
Hmm.
on some of us than others. And so it's really, for me, about being aware of that,
Right.
understanding it, embracing it, recognizing the strengths that come along
Hmm.
with that, and then figuring out, okay, what does it look like for me to
Wow.
participate in the work of social justice in a way that allows me to do this for the long term, in
Hmm.
a way that brings me not only meaning but also joy,
Yes, of
and
course.
it feeds my soul instead
Hmm.
of just exhausting me.
That's it. That's it. Instead of taking too much away from you, trying to, you know, do what you feel is right, but also it feels, it feels more sustainable because you
Hmm.
need to find ways to do it long term while not taking so much away from you. That's quite the journey. I mean, it's quite the story. 20 years of doing this, and in your experiences with between nonprofits and social enterprise sectors, you have now written this book, and you are now putting that word out there for, like you said, sensitive souls who want to
Hmm.
change the world in the quiet way, so to speak. What were you think? What do you think was the biggest? I mean, of course, there was that depression that was taking a toll on you as well. And you mentioned the world, burning during
Hmm.
2020 and all that. It must have felt like there was a better time to get into, to do your work, right? What
Hmm.
I want to ask before we start really getting into it is like, do you think it's getting better? Has it gotten better? Because you've been doing this a while, you've been in the same causes, and now you described it yourself that the world looked like it was burning 2020, and it did look like, it did look like that. And right now there's a US election. It's quite a doozy as well.
Mm,
It's not, it seems like,
absolutely.
ooh. And my question really is like, have you seen the fight? Is there anything better, or has the fight been easier, or has there anything improved at all? How do you maintain that optimism, if there is any optimism to be had at all?
I definitely think there needs to be optimism.
Yes, of course.
To some extent, one thing that I have learned over the years is that hope is a choice.
Mhm.
That yeah, sometimes we look at the world around us and things can look pretty dire. At the same time, there is a lot of good happening. There are a lot of
Mhm.
people doing amazing things around the world. And I think part of what we need to do, it's almost like a discipline because our media outlets, our social media feeds are always going to focus on
Right.
what's going wrong. That's sort of just the way the algorithms work. That's
Yeah.
what gets the clicks, right? And so
Yes.
so all the headlines that we see are going to focus on these are all the things that are going wrong in the world. But
Mhm.
the reality is that is not the whole story. It's never the whole story. Always something good happening in some corner, in multiple corners of the world. And we need to go looking for those stories. We need to go looking for those people and choose to really spend time in that and learning from what's working, not just lamenting what's going wrong, which I think there is a time and a place for that as well,
Of course.
but focusing on who's doing good, effective work.
Yes.
You know,
Wow, I love
so
that.
I have now been involved in the social enterprise sector for a little over a decade now. And that
Wow.
is a space that has just exploded in the
Mm.
last few years, right? I would say
Mhm.
20 years ago, very few people even knew what the idea was. And
Yes,
now,
exactly.
now this concept of for-profit business models,
Mhm.
but acting for the social good, right? With a
Wow.
social mission. So I'm not just talking about corporate social responsibility, which I think is a framework that we've had for longer. You know, so
Yes.
maybe you have
Yes.
a corporation that makes a lot of money and then
Mhm.
sets up a philanthropic arm that gives it away, or maybe they
Mhm.
try to be a little bit more green in their operations. Those are all
Mhm.
excellent things. But
Yes.
a social enterprise is a for-profit enterprise that at its core, its mission is to make the world better, to not in the abstract way that Google or other tech companies might talk about making the world better, but that they are providing services, products
Mhm.
specifically for people who are marginalized, people who have been
Mhm.
underserved. So, you know, the closest example for me is my husband is the co-founder of a company called D-Light. They make solar powered products for
Wow.
families living off the grid,
Wow.
especially in Africa and South Asia, right? And so these are families who don't have any access to electricity, are
Wow.
probably not going to be getting it anytime soon because their governments either don't have the resources or don't have the capability to set up the grid infrastructure to reach them. So solar power now
Wow.
is providing them with lighting, cell phone charging,
Wow.
television, radio, refrigeration, fans, essentially elevating their quality of
Wow.
life multiple times over.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And that would have been a very hard endeavor, I think, for a nonprofit to be able to pursue. But a
Mhm.
for-profit has access to a lot more capital, right? There
Mhm.
are just models of distribution and sales that they can rely on that then allows them to scale a lot faster and reach more people in more areas of the world. And so those are the kinds
Wow.
of stories that I
Wow.
look to when I'm like, well, what is going right in the world? And there's a lot. There's
Wow.
absolutely a lot. But it's not going to show up necessarily naturally on our feed. It is
Of
something
course.
that we need to go looking for and that we need to choose to really find hope in those stories.
I love that. Dorcas, of course, I love that you have provided that sense of optimism right now. And I love how you said, look for the good. There are always helpers, there are always people wanting to
Yeah,
help. And there's a
absolutely.
lot, there's always there. And I love that you've reminded us today, like, hey, it might look dire again, but there is the fight to be had, and we are doing some good, we are doing some change. And you also mentioned in your book, you mentioned six possible pathways for sensitive
Hmm.
souls to contribute to social justice. And I love how we kind of started framing this, that in a way that there is some good, that there's a lot of good that is happening because a lot of people are wanting to do good as well. For people who want to get into it as well, you mentioned these six pathways. Can you elaborate
Hmm.
maybe one or two, or one of your favorites of these pathways that provide real life examples? Or rather, if you have stories, by the way, we love stories on this
Yeah,
show. If you have
yeah.
if you have real life examples of these pathways of individuals who have made an impact through these roles that you talk about in your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So a major theme in my book is I just want to broaden the definition of what we consider to be social activism, social action. It's not
Mhm.
just about people protesting, marching, canvassing, putting on press conferences. Those are all well and good, but that's not going to be a good fit for everybody. And also,
Mhm.
you don't necessarily need everybody doing the exact same thing. It helps
Right.
our causes when we have a myriad of people approaching the same challenge from multiple angles, because these are really complicated social issues, and so we need
Right.
lots of creative solutions. And so I would love to encourage anyone who feels like they don't fit into that typical model of the
Right.
loud shouting, marching activists,
Mhm.
to recognize that there are so many other ways that you
Mhm.
can contribute that may fit a little bit better with your skills, your experience, your interests, your personality. And not only that, but they're extremely effective and they're very, very important. Every social
Mhm.
movement, so I looked at dozens of social movements across the last, couple of 100 years, and they all relied on um, hundreds, if not thousands, tens of thousands of people working behind the scenes in quiet ways whose names may never go down in history books, but
Right.
they were as much a part of the movement as your Martin Luther Kings and Gandhis and all of them. I mean, Gandhi and Dr. King, their message would never have gotten so far
Right.
and reached so many people, except that you had so many faithful advocates who, day in and day out, in small ways in their daily lives, right,
Yes.
were trying to encourage change in their
Right.
little corner of the
Mhm.
world. And so one of the pathways that I talk about is, I call them connectors. And what I love especially about this one is that pretty much anybody can be a connector. Anyone who
Connector.
likes talking to people, who likes being with people, and it doesn't have to be in a group setting, it could be one-on-one. But the reality is that I think one of the challenges we are facing nowadays is, because of social media, the internet, the pandemic, we have almost sort of forgotten how to
Mhm.
sit down and
Mhm.
have a very civil, kind, empathetic conversation, one on
Mhm.
one, face to
Mhm.
face, with somebody who either we don't know very well, who's from a different background, who may not agree with us,
Right.
right? Like, we're just used to kind of yelling at people across the digital space. But where people's minds actually change, where behavior changes, is through these in-person interactions. So Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist, he did a study where he looked at 500 other studies, right? So
Right.
this is so many studies that he looked, and they were all studies that involved two people having a face-to-face conversation, two people who did not previously know each other, who
Right.
had some sort of difference in background. Maybe they
Okay.
came from a different economic class,
Mhm.
different ethnic background, different nationality. And after a brief conversation where they were not debating, they were not trying to convince each other of any particular point, it was just, I'm trying to get to know you. I'm trying to understand you. I'm genuinely curious about who you are. After a brief in-person conversation, prejudice and bias had been reduced. I think it was about 94% of the time.
Wow.
And so there's so much power in us simply being willing to have a conversation and to be
Mhm.
kind and
Yes.
genuine with somebody who is different
Wow.
from us, right?
Mhm.
It's not about winning the argument. It's
Mhm.
about being their friend, which I
Mhm.
know it sounds trite, but it's actually not. It's much more
Yes.
powerful than we give it credit for. And I think a great example of this is somebody named Daryl Davis, who he is a jazz musician. He's a really talented pianist. And then he has this interesting side gig where he befriends members of the Ku Klux Klan. And Daryl Davis is Black. And so it just sort of happened by chance. He was performing at a club. Some guy came up to him afterwards and said, complimented him on his playing. And they got to talking, and then the guy just admitted that he was a member of the KKK. But Daryl just kept talking to him and asking him questions, trying to understand, why do you think this way? And not confrontational, not judgmental. And then that one friendship led to other friendships that led to more and more and more. And at this point, I think it's probably been about 15 years now that Daryl's been doing this. He has personally influenced more than 60 people to leave the Ku Klux Klan, like directly. And then indirectly, he thinks it's somewhere, above 200 people that are no longer members of the Ku Klux Klan because of this one man who was willing to just be their friend and to have a conversation, to ask questions from a genuine place of curiosity and caring. And how different would our world be, right? If everyone made a commitment to let's just talk to one another. Let's not try to argue. Let's not try to debate. Let's not try to come up with, one-line zingers that make the other person look bad. It's just want to get to know you and understand you. And that's something that anybody can do in any setting or context that they find themselves in. So that's one of the examples, and I think one of the most straightforward ones. The other ones, some of them fall a little bit more in line with what you might think of as a career or job or volunteer position. I talk about equippers, who are people like teachers and mentors and coaches, and I talk about researchers, academic researchers who are on the forefront of helping us understand what are our social challenges, what are the underlying causes, and what are the solutions that we can begin to look at. We've got record keepers like historians and librarians who help us track what actually happened, who was harmed, and how can we rectify that? How can we learn from those mistakes and do things differently in the future?
I love that. I love that. Of course, you have all these different pathways that you mentioned. You have your researchers, your equippers, your. I love what you call them, by the way. But also, I love that you framed it very first and foremost the connectors, because I feel like this is something that everyone can do. Like wherever you are, whatever your pathway is, whatever career you've chosen, you can be a connector. It's just
Absolutely.
sitting down and just relating. I love that. I love that concept because, again, we talk about the algorithm of social media, of just like hate always being just regurgitated constantly. How differently would our world be when we just look at it and then be like, hey, like instead of reacting with hate right away, it's like, why? Like let's sit down,
Yeah,
let's talk about it. I don't hate you, I'm not angry at you, but why do you think that way? And I think that very simple way of talking to people, of relating with them, does miles. I mean, I love your example with Davis, that to this day, is still making strides and making uh changes in just simply being friends with people, just being there for them. And chances are people just want to belong, want to just people want to
yeah,
be somewhere. And if we sit down to that point where we just connect with them and find out how can they belong better, how can they be made feel special, I think that alone, individually making that change, we're making strides in social justice, because
absolutely.
it starts with
Yeah.
the
And
individual.
on the other side, if we are working on a social cause we really care about, and maybe we're able to get some legislation passed or some policy changed, or something happens that feels like a win, and yet in the process we have pushed so many people away, we have shamed them, we told them that they are not welcome to be part of our movement. I wonder, how much progress have we really made, right? I think, oftentimes we forget that the underlying sort of foundational vision of Dr. King it was not simply civil rights for African Americans or advocating for the poor, or, being advocating for peace, which he did all of that. But nonviolence was so important to him because he had this vision of a beloved community in which everybody felt like they had dignity, that they were heard, that they
Yes.
were able to live as their true selves, no matter what, no matter your level of privilege, no matter your ethnic or racial background, no matter what your beliefs were, you were welcome in this beloved community. And so if our activism functions in such a way that we are ostracizing people, that we are canceling people, that we are harming people along the way, then we're not necessarily moving ourselves toward this beloved
Yes.
community. We may be actually creating more harm than good. And so I think it's really, really important to consider, how do we infuse this sense of gentleness and
Right.
kindness, understanding, empathy
Right.
in how we interact with others, even when we're super passionate about
Oh,
an issue,
goodness.
when we're super, clear about what needs to happen, can
Precisely.
we still be kind and compassionate? And a big reason why I talk about that in this book is that people who are highly sensitive, who are empathetic souls, are people who this comes a little bit more naturally for them, and it's
Right.
a lot of how they kind of already operate. And so I would encourage them to embrace that personality trait, because it is a superpower that
It is.
really can change the people around you. It can change your communities and ultimately change the world. And I think that it's a great model for other people who may not be naturally as sensitive, who may find it a little bit harder to empathize with others. But I think that if we see more and more that there is this very effective, meaningful model for connecting with others, for advocating for change in a way that brings people along, that invites them in as opposed to pushing them away, that can be really inspiring for folks, no matter what their personality is.
I love that. I love it. And of course, again, like you said, it's about being emphatic, being there, not ostracizing people, because again, people just want to belong. But I also love how you say that embrace this, embrace being a sensitive soul, because it's a gift. It's something that we
Yes.
needed in the world. So many of our listeners might relate to being a sensitive soul themselves. What what advice would you give them on how to start making a positive impact in their own unique, quiet
Hmm.
ways?
Yes, I love your emphasis on the word unique,
Yeah.
because even though I have these 6 pathways in the book, they're just suggestions. They're just
Mhm.
meant to be a starting point, and how I choose to try to make the world better is going to be different how you do it, how others do it. And so I really encourage people to begin with self-understanding,
Mhm.
self-awareness, paying attention. Who really am I? What are the kinds of activities, work,
Mhm.
relationships that drain me? First and foremost, it's really helpful to know what doesn't work for you. And
Yes,
then what are the ones that give me life, give me energy, give me joy?
I
What are
love
the
that.
social issues that I care about?
Yeah.
There are so many in the world. And so maybe just
Mhm.
start with one, right? And try to understand yourself, and what does it look like to be your true self, to not try to pretend to be a particular kind of social activist, but
Right.
truly be who you are, a sustainable way in
Yes.
an issue area that you care about. So I think that's the first step. I think another step is feel free to experiment, to try it
Yeah.
out. I'm not
Yeah.
even sure where I got this idea, but I grew up with this idea of, you find your calling and that's it. And it's like that's just what you do for the rest of your life. And while I would say I know that my calling is in the area of social justice, right? It's a huge area. There are hundreds of different things that I could do within that. And I have gone back and forth and been part of so many different organizations, not knowing exactly what role was good for me, what issue I wanted to work on. And I sort of did it by accident. But at the same time, I feel like there is some healthiness in just giving ourselves permission of, hey, I'm just going to try this out. Like if I don't know if this works for me, maybe I just volunteer for a couple hours a week or even a month just to see what it's like, see how it feels, try it on for size. If I don't like it, then I move on and I try something else. Or if it's something that exhausts me, probably not the best fit, right? And so there is absolutely room and space for experimentation, to research, to talk to people, see what are people doing, maybe shadow someone if there's someone whose work you really admire and you just want to understand, is this something I could do? There are so many good resources available to us nowadays, right? Like just at the tip of our fingertips, we can access so much information, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And so to just try something, I think too much information can also be paralyzing. And so I would say, as soon as you find something that mildly intrigues you, then take a step toward it. Do some research, talk to someone who's doing it, try to volunteer for an hour or two. And that's where you're really going to start to get valuable information and data around who am I, what works for me, what doesn't work for me. And you may very well end up creating your totally own unique path that
Yeah.
looks like nobody else's. And that
Mhm.
may require some measure of courage. It's almost like an entrepreneurial endeavor to some
Yes, of
extent.
course. Mhm.
Um, but that's okay. Like, to embrace the fact that your path may look nothing like anybody else. And I actually think that's a beautiful and wonderful thing, because we are all such different individuals. And
Mhm.
so, of course, the way that you approach social change would be different and unique as well.
I love that. I love how you framed it. Of course, first and foremost, something that is sustainable, something that doesn't take
Yes.
away too much from you. Because if anything, if we're gonna get into this as individuals wanting to make change, we need people, to be able to say themselves. Of course, this is something that you experienced, that you went through. If you didn't, you weren't self-aware enough just to take care of yourself, then we wouldn't have
Mm,
you talking about this. We wouldn't have your voice in your book talking about this particular cause. So it's a great message to put out there to frame that if you want to get into social justice, make sure you take care of yourself first so that we can
yes.
continue the work. I love that.
Yes. Social change, it's a long road.
Mhm.
And so we need folks who are able to be in it for the long haul. The average social activist burns out after 2 to 5 years, and they're done. They're out. They leave the work altogether because they do not know how to remain in a way that is sustainable. And so if you think about it that way, because I think sometimes we think of self-care as seeming very selfish,
Mhm.
but it's not. It's, if you think about all of the activists that we are losing, that we are burning them out, and their passion, their skill, their experience, their knowledge and wisdom, all of that, the causes we care deeply about, that we're losing because we don't know how to take care of ourselves and one another. That's really tragic. I would love for, I mean, social justice is all about caring for people, right? And so the care begins with, how do we care for each other and create a culture in which everybody has dignity, in which everybody is honored, and that includes honoring one another's limits. That I think is so much at the core of what it is to be a healthy activist and to develop a healthy social activist culture. And I want, oh my goodness, I want activists who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, still in the fight, because they have so much to bring that,
Yes.
people in their 20s and 30s, they have something, but they don't have the wisdom and the experience. And
Not
we need
yet.
people of all ages, all levels of experience, to be part of these causes, these movements, because it is only when we all put together our skills and our efforts that truly change can happen.
I love that. I love Dorcas. Of course, I love the passion. I love the enthusiasm. I can feel it through here, all across, the world. And Dorcas, uh, there's really not much, else to what you said. Like you've said everything right in the way of getting into social justice and the work and how to stay in it how to stay in the fight, right? And I think it's
Mm.
such a great guidance for people who are really passionate about it, of wanting to make a change in the world. And I'm just glad that we have you. We have the voice talking about this and guiding other voices
Thank
out there,
you.
other souls out there, other sensitive souls who just want to make a change. Dorcas, as much as I would love to keep talking to you, where can we find you, first of all? Where can we find this book that we've been talking about? We need to know more. Um, and where can we connect with you? Where are you most active in? Where are you most, where are you? And we'd love to connect with you.
Yeah, well, the book is available. I think pretty much every major online book retailer has
Wow.
available. So no matter where you are in the world, hopefully you'll be able to find it and access it. It's if you like the hardback version, that's available, but there's also audiobook, ebook, whatever your preferred
Fantastic.
version. And
Mhm.
love connecting with people. So even though I disparage social media a bit, I am on it. I'm not on it as much as I used to be because I have found that it is very healthy to set some
Mhm.
limits, but I am on it. I do check it. And so I'd love to connect with folks. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, I think are the three platforms that I am most frequently on. You can find me at Cheng-Tuzon is my username for all of those. And I am also at chengtuzon.com if you wanted to just learn a little bit more about me and the other things that I've written about and I talk about. That's a great place to connect as well.
I love it. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to send Dorcas a connection on LinkedIn. Follow her on Instagram and all her
Yes,
socials.
please.
Check out chengtozin.com and definitely buy a copy of her book. I will definitely grab a copy myself. Dorcas, this has been great. This has been very enlightening and very optimistic. I definitely feel optimistic now, and I'm just glad that I'm happy to have you on the show. Thank you for agreeing to come on.
I'm so grateful for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
Fantastic, Dorcas. And to all our audience and listeners out there, continue the fight. Put
Mm.
put all that work in, but remember to take care of yourself. Thank you for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we do. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.